Right, so we are live and we are going to look at continuing on with our IMVU couples pose project. So in the previous streams we created, let's just resize Blender. So in the previous streams we created our couples poses. Let's get this right. Right, so we create our couples poses. So we've got couples pose 4. So that's one pose. Hide that. So that was one pose. That's the first pose. Yeah, that was one pose. Yeah, so that's one pose. And then what we did is created a mesh dummy of this pose, which we then imported or appended into no, I think it's that one. Yeah, so we then appended, oops, we're in pose mode, hang on, which we appended into another pose project using the toolkit so that we could then repose or create an accompanying pose that uses the dummy as a proxy so that we could create what is essentially a couples pose. But this is for furniture rather than for an avatar. So this is not, what would it be called? It's a cooperative pose where you load a pose into, well, in order for this to be a cooperative pose for avatars, you'd need your two avatars, so that, let's say two completely different users would have to have these poses as products that they wear, and then when depending on the furniture item, when they use the same spot or when they are on the furniture item, it would then create a sort of a pseudo cooperative pose, but it's not a proper or true cooperative pose in the sense of when the avatars interact. So when you right click in IMVU and you get the menu popping up, that menu popping up that gives you the options for what you can do with the avatars, those are actually your cooperative poses. So this isn't a cooperative pose in that sense. It's not, it doesn't affect the avatars when you click on that menu. This is a couples pose for a furniture item, and that's what we'll do today, is actually make the furniture item. But those are our two poses. So again, we created a mesh dummy which we appended into our second pose file, which allowed us to then create the second pose relative to the dummy. So now that we've got all of that, we can create the furniture items. So to do that, we have to create obviously a new project. Don't save. And then because we're in TikTok, we'll have to create our layouts so that we don't get too many buttons and things on screen. So we're going to create a new layout, or two. Duplicate current, do that again, duplicate current, and that's dropped in two layouts that we can rename. So double click and we'll call this tick tock outliner, and we'll call this one TikTok 3D. These layouts will be saved to the file when we save the file. So let's just join these together. So this is TikTok 3D. So mouse over the border, the dividing lines between the areas, right click, join areas, right click, join areas. Whoops. That gives us our 3D view. Same again. So click drag the border to match the map. Join areas that way. Join areas that way. So this just now means we've got, it just makes it clearer on screen so that we've got our outliner panel and the properties panel. So this gives us access to the materials, object properties, and all sorts of other things. But it's just easier to toggle back and forth. So let's just save this file, save as. Need to be in the right place. Let's just save it in here. Couples 1. Save as. Right, so that has now saved these new layouts into the project. So Toolkit, sidebar. There's the toolkit, click on that, and we want for this furniture tool. So click on that, create furniture, and that will drop in. I'm just going to hide the toolbar or the toolkit for the moment. That will drop in these elements. So these are the templates for creating IMVU furniture. So we've got our standing dummy and our sitting dummy and a furniture proxy, which is the same height as the seated dummy. So this is our general template object for creating furniture to get the scaling correct relative to the avatars. And then the important bit that we need for this project is the root node. This is the thing that's actually used by IMVU to position, locate furniture item. It's the key to a room, a furniture room's furniture node. So when we are making our rooms, we've got nodes all over the place, and this locks onto those nodes. So that's the only thing we actually need for this project. So what we're going to do is drop in from the add menu. We're just going to drop in a mesh and a plane, so a flat plane. So drop that in, and it's dropped it in there. It's tiny, so we can resize this. So scale. So we've got our widgets: move, rotate, and scale. Or we can use the one that combines all three together. So scale. We'll get the scale widget, and then all we need to do is click drag anywhere inside the white loop to scale uniformly on all axes. So we can either click drag, scale, hold control to snap to increments. So we can either do it that way, so that's 4 times bigger, or let's just undo that, undo. We can click drag to initiate and then just type 4, and it will automatically scale up 4 times. Press enter to confirm, and that confirms the size of our mesh. So that's our mesh. That's all we need to do in this particular project anyway. So it's basically a carpet of sorts. So next thing, we need to add a material and a texture. So we've got our object selected, so it outlines in that orange. We want to use our layouts, so TikTok 3D, we want TikTok outliner. That gives us access to materials. So what we can do here is click on that. So our object doesn't have a material assigned to it. Sometimes when they are added to the scene, they have a default material, and that material is conveniently called material. So we can use that because that's a redundant material. So we're clicking on the browse material button. We can use that, or we can create a new one. Either or does the same thing, and it'll just drop in a new material, similar properties. So we can do either or. Let's just stick with this one for the time being. So we'll just call this couples rug. Now this needs to be compatible for IMVU. So our material names are our name label space square brackets 0 in this case because we only got one material, close square brackets. That's an IMVU compatible material name. We can give it a color if we want, just temporarily, so that we can see what's so if we had a lot of materials or several materials, we can give them a color so that we can distinguish them in the 3D view. So click on this color bar, set the color, and that will change the surface appearance of our object. So it's now orange, and that's our material basics. So that's the basic material. But what we need to do next, we need to be in, so click drag shading workspace, because we're going to assign, this could get tricky because we're all scrunched up now. So there is our object. We're going to assign an image to our material node collection. So these are the two defaults, principled BSDF and material output. All we need to do is going to add texture, and then we want image texture, and this will drop in. So that's add texture, image texture. This will drop in a node that will allow us to either create a new one. So this is a temporary generated image, or we can click open, which we'll do in this case, and we'll load in an actual image. So let's see which one we can use. Let's go into furniture. Have we got anything in here? Where's that brick wall gone? Oh, there it is. So we'll use the brick wall. Now remember, for classic, if you're going to be using classic editor, your images should be no larger than 256 by 512 in horizontal, vertical, or so that's 512 by 256 or 256 by 512. But for Studio, we can use 512 by 512, a square image. So select, just click on open. That loads it into our image texture node, and all we need to do is click drag the little output node to connect it to the input node, like so. There is our image. So if we wanted to, because this is a plane, it will be UV mapped. So that's our basic material. That's all we need to do. Just load an image, link that up, and then it'll show that image on our object. So that's all we need to do. With this being a plane, it doesn't necessarily need to be UV mapped, because it has a default mapping that's associated with the mesh that in this case has mapped our image one-to-one with the plane. So if we go into UV editing, oh, this is going to be tricky as well. Let's try this could be tricky. Hang on. So horizontal split, like so. Horizontal split, like so. Let's join areas like that, and then join areas like that. There we go. So we can't see our image yet, so we just need to switch to material preview. So click drag the header, material preview. There it is. And as mentioned, as we can see, the UV is mapped one-to-one with our plane. So if this were a cube, the mapping would be different. And that would mean we would have to do some UV editing. So that would be, if that were a cube or a sphere or another shape, the UV here, so if it was a cube, it would be something like this. So we would have to unwrap this UV, so each one of these sections would be a face of our cube. We would have to unwrap that based on how we want our image to appear on each face of the cube. For example, actually, whilst we've got this here, the reference object, we can see this on the reference object. So if we toggle back into object mode, select the reference object, go back into edit mode, we'll see how that's mapped. So each face, so face select, is mapped differently. So select, so that's that face, that's, whoops, face, that's that face. So each face is mapped to a different area of the image. You don't necessarily need to unwrap your objects like this, which is each face is mapped individually. Depending on the object, depends on the UV map, or the eventual UV map that you have, and that's the top face. So as our object is a plane, we don't need to do that. It's automatically or automagically mapped one-to-one. So that's our object setup. So we've added a material. Hang on. Yeah, right. We've added a material. Let's just smush that over. There's our material. It's now showing the brick texture. It's now showing the brick texture on our preview. So that overrides the initial color that we assigned to our object. We don't need to do the UV mapping as mentioned because it's a plane. So that is our base object. So once we've got that, it's time to set up our furniture item as a furniture item. So we need a toolkit. So there's a toolkit. It's got lots of buttons and options. All we need for this is to add a couple of seat nodes. So by default, we've got idle, standing, and sitting. Idle, you don't really want to use for avatar poses, seat spots. Those generally are for animated furniture items. We could use standing, we could use sitting, but as we've got custom custom poses, custom avatar poses, we're going to use the custom option. And here all we do is click type and name. So let's call this couples, like so. Uppercase, first letter, capitalized. And then all we need to do is click on the button and it will drop in a set of seat nodes. So let's just hide the toolbar for the minute. Use the move widget. Hold Control so that we're snapping to the grid and move that to one side. So what we have a seat node. This is where the avatar actually appears when the furniture item is being used. We have the handle. That's what users click on to use the seat spot that's on the furniture item. And then we've got the capture and picture nodes for the interaction between avatars when the avatars so that's the cooperative. These are the nodes that cooperative poses actually use between avatars. And they're a fixed distance to ensure that they interact correctly. So we've got our seat node where the avatar appears, we've got the handle which the user clicks, and then the capture and picture nodes. So for our poses, let's just save this. File. If you're using Blender 2.4 or above, we've got this little option, Save Incremental. If we click on that, so we've got it saved as version 1. If we click on that, it'll version save and increment to version 2. So it'll automatically do that for us. So we don't necessarily need to keep going File, Save As, and then into the browser. Right, so seat nodes. The way that we've got our poses set up, that one, they both use the same origin point, which is at grid center. So the toolkit will load the pose tool so that the avatar is standing by default at this location. Our poses are then posed or manipulated relative to this spot. As we've got two avatars in the scene, we've got them both using that location as an origin point. So this means that when either avatar is loaded into the scene and using that furniture item, they will be positioned at this point. And for our furniture item, that's where the root node of the furniture item is. So if we go back to our furniture, don't save, that center point, which we can't see just yet because we have these nodes selected, but if we select the root node, what we want to do here actually is hide these components because we don't need them anymore. So we can select, shift click, and then press the H button or show hide. So object, show hide, hide selected. So there's the H key. Whoops, because we don't need those. So the root node designates that origin point, but we want the avatars to appear there, which use their own origin point. So we have to shift or move or position the seat node. The seat node is the origin of the seat set. Position that at, in this case, grid center, where the avatars are expected to appear. But because we have two avatars using the same spot, we want to offset the handles so that they are not in the same location. So if we click that, hold Control, snap to the grid, so 1, 2, 3, that just offsets it. We can also offset the capture and picture, but they have to be offset as a pair to keep the distance correct. So let's just do that. So that's set 1. Open the toolkit again. We're going to click on the custom button again. Add another set. And this time, just going to offset that so we can see it. So this is the same set. So we've got our seat node, handle, capture, and picture. But for this, because the avatars are facing opposite one another, we want to rotate this set, this new set. We want to rotate that 180. So, rotate widget, click drag the blue circle. So again, we can either click drag, hold Control, snap to the grid, or we can initiate the tool and then type 180 in this case, and it'll flip it around, enter to confirm. We can move that into position Again, uses the same spot because the avatars are using the same spot. Offset the handle and then offset the capture and picture like so. So that is the basics of our furniture item. So let's just save this file, save increment. Now, this is the critical component to get this to work correctly with 2 custom poses. So right now, we've got a furniture item. Let's just open up the outliner. We've got a furniture item. So all the components that we want to include in the furniture project are going to be within furniture export. So if we just expand the root, click on the down arrow, well, the arrow, click on that, expand all these. So what we've got are 2 uniquely identified seat spots, so seat 01 and seat 02. They use the same unique identifier that identifies them as custom seat nodes that is expecting a custom pose, but it's the same couples for all of them. So if we load this into Studio, into IMVU, what this will do is create a furniture item that uses the same pose with both seats. Now this might be what you want in terms of a furniture item that has the same sitting pose, for example, spread around a couch. So you've got your own custom pose, but it's the same one repeatedly used for each seat node. So this gives us unique seat nodes or unique positions, and then the append gives us a reference to the pose that's going to be associated with these seat nodes. It's a little complicated, but if we have unique seats and we want each seat to use a unique pose, we have to make the appends unique themselves. And we do that by just renaming them. So double click or slow click. There we go. In this case, let's just call it A. So we need to do this for the set. So seat, capture, picture. Don't do it for handle. That always stays the same. Underscore A. Underscore A. And then this one, underscore B. So we now have 2 uniquely identified B, 2 uniquely identified seat nodes. So this will now mean that when we load this into Studio, Studio is expecting pose 1 for this one and pose 2 for this one. Otherwise, as mentioned, it'll use the same pose for both of them. Right, so that's that. We could have done that in the 3D view by selecting each node, and then in the outliner, so we want object properties, we could do that here as well. So just in this TikTok format, it's a little tricky to do because we've reorganized the 3D view. But so if we were in the standard layout where we have access to all the options, you select the node, make sure that we're in object properties, and then we have the name. So handles, we don't change those at all, ever. Well, assuming that you haven't made an error somewhere and you need to rename them or renumber them. So that's our skeleton for our furniture item. So we've got 2 sets of seat nodes uniquely referencing, or will uniquely reference, a unique individual pose. So let's save this, file increment. So we're about ready to export, but our mesh needs to be included in the export folder, because when we add objects to the scene in Blender, it generally adds them to the base scene collection, which is down here for our plane, which is outside the furniture export collection. Everything that we want to include has to be inside this collection, and we can do that a couple of ways. So we can either in the outliner click drag and drop that into furniture export, or let's undo that, we can in the 3D view select our object, where's collection, move to collection, so object and then collections under there, object, collection, move to collection. It'll give us this pop-up, and there is furniture export. Click that and it'll move. It won't do anything because the collection is visible, but if we then check in the outliner, our plane is in place. So we can rename this so that we know what we're dealing with rather than the generic. So double click again. We could do that in the outliner, not the outline, object properties. So let's call this couples rug. Whoops. Couples rug. Now when we're using the toolkit, we don't need to do anything else. So we don't need to mess around with vertex groups. We don't need to mess around with armature modifiers, parenting, anything like that. So long as our objects are inside furniture export, the tool will fix everything up for us. It'll automatically arrange things so that the furniture functions in IMVU. So any objects that we add, just make sure they are in furniture export, and again make sure that our names, our labels, are correctly set up relative to what we're doing in this project, which is using custom avatar poses. So each one of these has been given a unique identifier. So that is basically our furniture item set up and ready to export. So let's save that, save increment. And then with the toolkit, we export using the option that's available. Do not use file export FBX. We don't use this at all. Use toolkit. So all we need to do is just click on that, and it should give us a confirmation message, but because of the format and the layout we might not be able to see it. But there's usually a confirmation message which we can now open, not the confirmation message but the FBX that we've exported. We can now open that in Studio. So IMVU Studio. And then create our project. And we want to be in furniture, rooms and furniture rather, furniture, and then we want the empty furniture item. So click. That's the preview. And just click on derive. So that will take a few seconds. So obviously there's nothing in the scene other than our avatar based on our inventory. And all we need to do next is import our FBX. So import FBX. Browse to Find the file. There it is. So select and then just open. Go through the import process. So that's what it's found in the file. So FBX setup. All of this is okay. We don't need to mess around with that. Mesh ID, we want to change that to 0. Everything else is okay. Next. There is our material, the brick wall. Next. No animation. That's what it's going to bring in. Import. There is our furniture item rug. What we can do is enable skeleton so that we can see furniture skeleton and check that it's functioning correctly. So there are the handles. We've moved them offset like so, and then of course we've got the catcher and pitcher nodes just all represented by these little widgets. So that's the basics. We need to now import. Let's save this actually file. Save as couples fern 1, because we need to import the poses. Let's import FBX. So we don't need to do anything to this. It's automatically assembled everything for us. If there were animations, or so if it was an animated furniture file, we would have to then go into component and then set up those bits and pieces. But as this is just a standard furniture item, all we need to do is just import it, and IMVU will automatically set it up for us, or auto assemble it. So now we need to import the poses. Import FBX, find the poses. So this is pose. So there's the, so it's pose couples pose 1, couples pose 2, one at a time. So select, open, go through the import process again. It's found our animation. So setup. We don't need to do anything here. So everything here is okay. We don't need to mess around with that, with the meshes, because we're just bringing in animation. Next, no materials. Next, there is our pose. Just review. Now, because we have brought in a pose, it's also going to bring in the avatar skeleton that's associated with the pose. When we do that, or when we are importing avatar poses, it will also bring in the skeleton. When we do that, what will often happen is that this skeleton will override the skeleton for the furniture item. IMVU always does that. It will automatically override something. So when we bring this in, so import, it's going to override, and there we can see that it's done that and dropped in the avatar skeleton as a skeleton for our furniture item. So we have to correct for that, but let's bring in the second pose as well so that we don't have to keep doing that, resetting. Import FBX, second pose, where is it? Couples pose 2, open, go through the import process again. So let's just quickly do that. So that's okay. Next, that's okay. That's okay. There's the pose 2. Review again, bring in the skeleton, but now this is just going to override the override. Import. See, it's changed the pose. So now that it's done that, we've got both poses in place. We can go into component and skeleton. that's telling us what's being used. So we need to edit that, change the asset to, in this case, it's a furniture item, so we just want root node preview, and it changes it back. So we've got our handles set up for our poses. So now that we've got everything in the file, the components, let's just click on assets. So we've got pose 1, pose 2, and then the assets for the furniture item. All we need to do now is combine everything and set it all up. Right, so to get the poses into place, we need to set up an action. So click on actions, new action. There is our action. Now this is the critical part. So alongside making sure that we correctly name our seat nodes to reference or to allow us to reference a custom pose in Studio, Classic Studio, we have to do a similar thing with the trigger name or the action name. So when we edit that, the action name, the trigger name, that needs to be stance dot our custom label. So in this case it was couples underscore A. That's seat 1. Our new ensemble asset drop down, and there we have our poses. So let's go with pose 1 just to check. So this is a static pose, so we're only playing 1 frame. So frame 1 start, frame 2 end, infinite loops 0. Disable gaze if we want. So enable, then click apply, preview, and that should give us our pose, our custom pose. So that's on that node. So we need to create another one, another action. So again, that's the default. We need to edit that. Similarly, name trigger, this is going to be stance dot couples underscore B, enter, which is the name of the second seat set. Create our new ensemble for this one. Asset, so this is going to be pose 2. Again, start frame 1, end frame 2, infinite loop 0. Disable gaze. Apply. Preview. And then that should give us our second pose. So let's drop in a new actor, a new thespian. Oh, that's the creator actor. So click on that to add a new one. There is our second avatar. So this is going to be a little tricky. So click on that. That's actor 1. Highlight actor number 2 or actor number 1, and then click on the other spot, which is there, and that is our custom furniture item using custom poses. They're a little fiddly to set up because of this. It's mainly because of getting your seat nodes correct. Have to get those correct. So in Blender, if we are using different avatar poses per seat set, we have to make sure that the set is identified uniquely. And generally speaking, the append needs to be a label and a letter. If you use numbers, it may cause issues with Studio or the process, the import process, recognizing the numbers and inadvertently converting them into seats. We want to try and avoid that. So just stick with your label, avoid using the word seat, and a letter or letters as your append to identify each set as being unique. And then in Studio or Classic, we have to make sure that our action names correspond to the seat sets. So they are stance dot the label and the append, and that's all we need to do. It can be a little confusing to begin with, but once you get it, you get it. But that is our custom furniture with custom pose seat spots referencing custom avatar poses. Right, let's save that. File, save as. Apples, burn 2. And of course, if we were happy with the project, all we then need to do is info, choose a thumbnail, and that may or may not work depending on the furniture item, because the thumbnails are a little tricky. So select your thumbnail. Let's go with that one for this, just as an example. We can use the same thumbnail for both of them, which it'll do. Then we just change the name if we want, set a price for derivation, set our derivation options, and then we just submit to the catalog. But that is using the toolkit to create 2 custom poses, custom furniture item. So yeah, that's our custom furniture item. These were the custom poses. These were our custom poses. And then all of that is put together in Studio to create a custom furniture item.